county of Wexford was at the heart of the lyrical poetry written by Winifred M, 1882 to 1972. We welcome Aileen Lambert, traditional singer-composer, Nellie Fortune, traditional singer, and Bairbre O'Hogan, biographer of W.M. They will use poetry, prose and songs to introduce you to the life and the works of this poet, warpoet, dramatist, novelist and children's writer. In this presentation, Bairbre O'Hogan will provide insight into the life and works of Winifred at the various stages in her life, while Aileen and her daughter Nellie will perform several songs in the solo, unaccompanied in the traditional style. W.M. biography, Sing in the Quiet Places of My Heart, the life and works of W.M. 1882 to 1972 by Bairbre O'Hogan, is published by South Dublin Libraries and records for the first time the life and the writing career of Winifred M. and is available to purchase here today. Thanks to Emma from South Dublin Libraries. So, Carfáilte wrote the Hull, Aileen and Nellie Conara Hanna.
I think if I lay dying in some land where Ireland is no more than just a name, my soul would travel back to find the strand from whence it came. I'd see the harbour in the evening light, the old men staring at some distant ship, the fishing boats they fasten left and right beside the slip, the sea rat lying on the windswept shore, the grey thorn bushes growing in the sand, our Wexford coast from Arklow to Cahors, my native land. The little houses climbing up the hill, see daisies growing in the sandy grass, the tethered goats that wait large eye down still to watch you pass. The women at the well with dripping pails, their men colloguing by the harbour wall, and the coils of rope, the nets, the old brown sails, I know them all. And then the Angelus I'd surely see, the swaying bell against a golden sky. So God, who kept the love of home in me, would let me die.
Thank you so much. I wanted to start, maybe this is very self-centered, but I wanted to introduce you to Let's, the way that I came upon her. So in 2017, I was undertaking a traditional song collection project in the area around Clonmacridge. So apart from collecting existing traditional songs and ballads that were sung, we also were looking at maybe recitations that were spoken that we might put a traditional air to, or somebody would turn up each week with maybe something from the newspaper that had been printed, but an air was unknown. Sometimes an air would be named and we'd go, oh, because a singer in the tradition, often airs would be reused because it's an easy way to pass on songs. Colin Brennan, who I'm delighted to see is with us here today, was involved in that project, and he turned up on with the harbour. So Colin was familiar with it, because as you hear in the song, Let's, in the voice in the harbour is speaking as a Wexford person, our Wexford coast, my native land. And here in the Garden of Remembrance in Courtown, here, Sishi, here, yeah. Let me see, wrong it. So there's a Garden of Remembrance where there's a number, and what did you press?
Magic touch, that's all.
Had I it upside down?
We'll say no more, don't worry.
So you think you get through all the technical difficulties there now. So this plaque here, you can't see from here. In fact, if you're standing in front of this plaque, it is a little bit difficult to read. But we're delighted that it's there. It's the words of the harbour. So that's how I first came upon Winifred. Then, among tons of other things I was doing, like I was dying to find out, when I find something like this, I go, that person wrote, obviously, many more things. Quick Google showed up a couple of things, some not very interesting, in fact some quite incorrect. In one place in her bio she was identified as being from Wexford, so she had not been terribly well charted, apart from collections of war poetry. That was another place she turned up, and then very luckily I happened upon a letter that was printed in the Irish Times by Bairbre O'Hogan, who's here today, and who has made sure that the next time somebody does a Google on Winifred M. Letts, that they will be led to the book that is being launched here today, which is an absolutely wonderful biography of Winifred M. Letts by somebody who not only is so familiar with the work but also knew her, spent many, many hours in the company of Winifred M. Letts. So that was my introduction to Winifred M. Letts, and at that I would like to welcome to the stage, to begin to tell us more about the life and works of Winifred M. Letts, Bairbre O'Hogan. Thank you, Bairbre.
Gormagad Aileen Lambert agus Gurvina Mabi as Curro Hortam and Shop in Young. Thank you very much for inviting us here to the Fleadh Cheoil and hÉireann to speak about Winifred Letts. When people say, or when I say to people that I knew Winifred, I immediately, I think, put myself back into the 19th century, not just the 20th. People are amazed to think that a poet who was born in the 19th century, died in the early 20th century, is still remembered. And one of the reasons I wrote the book was because I'm pretty sure that I am the youngest person alive who knew Winifred well. And I knew her well through a connection that my mother had with her. My mother had grown up on a farm in Kildare, where her husband was the land agent or the land steward, and Winifred made a great friendship with my mother's family, and that continued right up to her death in 1972. So that was my connection with Winifred. But just to fill you in, as Aileen said there, it was often said that she was from Wexford. She definitely wasn't. She was born in Manchester in 1882, and she was the daughter of Reverend Ernest Letts. Many of you may be familiar with Letts' diaries, so it was that family. But more importantly, her mother was an Irish woman. She was Mary Isabel Ferrier from Knockmaroon, just outside the gates of the Phoenix Park. And again, some people may recognise Ferrier Pollock. They were haberdashery importers, a very big company in Dublin at the time, and they had their headquarters in what is now the Powerscourt Townhouse shopping centre. But that was the Ferrier Pollock head office. So Winifred grew up in Manchester in what she called smoke-blackened and rather grim Manchester. But every summer they came to Knockmaroon, to her mother's home, for the summer holidays. And she compared that to paradise. It was such a different environment for them. And at the age of 16, she moved from her boarding school in the English Midlands to come to Alexandra College. And after her father's death, his premature death in 1904, her mother and Winifred and her two sisters moved permanently to Blackrock, County Dublin. And so she lived in Ireland for 41 years of her 90 years. So even though she was English born, she was most definitely an Irish resident and very Irish in her outlook. And from the time she moved to Ireland in 1904, it was as if the space in Ireland gave her the mental space to be creative. Because in the next 10 years, she had two plays in the Abbey Theatre. She wrote 2 children's books. She wrote a number of religious-themed books, and she had lots of stories and essays and short stories published in journals and magazines and newspapers. But in 1913, she published her first book of poetry, Songs from Leinster, and the poem that Nellie and Aileen sang so beautifully there, The Harbour, that is in that collection. And the very first section of that is called In a Wexford Village. And she has lots of references there to Wexford. Winifred also said that she never heard anything interesting in drawing room conversation, that all the things she heard and that inspired her were at the back door, the people who came to sell vegetables and have the chat and sell blackberries from Glencullen and so on. So the Courtown one that we had there in the harbour was The View. But I think the next song that Aileen and Nellie are going to sing, or Nellie alone, is it, in service, is one of those songs that she probably got from somebody that she met at the back door. So, Nellie, thank you.
Little Nellie Cassidy has got a place in town. She wears a fine white apron, she wears a new black gown, and the queerest little cap at all with streamers hanging down. I met her one fine evening, stravaiging down the street, a feathered hat upon her head and boots upon her feet. Och, mixer, she may God be praised that you and I should meet. It's lonesome in the city with such a crowd, says she. I'm lost without the bogland, I'm lost without the sea, and the harbour and the fishing boats that sail out fine and free. To see the small white houses, the faces through the sea, the children in the doorway around my mother's knee, for I'm strange and lonesome missing them, God keep them all, says she. Little Nellie Cassidy earns £14 and more, awaiting on the quality and answering the door, but her heart is someplace far away upon the Wexford shore.
It's interesting what Bairbre said about Winifred not being so interested in the conversations that took place in the drawing room, but the chat at the back door. And listening to Nellie saying that, Nellie is my daughter, by the way, and so she's picked up the couple of songs from me singing them. And I love that one for her to sing because, of course, she has the same name as the girl in the song. She's also probably about the same age as young Nellie Cassidy was when she went off to work in the big house. Nellie also, her surname is Fortune, and that's her dad's name, and Fortunes, and so her granny grew up in the area not far from Courtown Harbour, from around, from Ballygarrett actually, about 5 miles south of Courtown. So even in terms of talking about the voice and the language and the natural singing style Nellie has, it's almost like speaking. In terms of traditional singing, we hope to, have it as natural as possible to the speaking voice. It's all about telling the story and using your own voice. So I think there's some lovely links there. So I just wanted to say, so as you can hear, that song has quite similar scenes. It's describing scenes quite similar to the harbour, coming from that time, from the songs from Leinster publication. Did anyone pick up the term there, stravaiging down the street? Well, were any of you ever stravaiging down the street? Seemingly, it's John Roach that many people who are involved in music and cults here in Wexford, he was the one, when I put this up on Facebook, what is this word? I wasn't familiar. Of course, my parents did know then when I asked them too, but stravaiging down the street, it's kind of, she was going down the street with the feather in her hat, and her nice boots. But stravaiging, kind of being a little bit show-offy, I think, stravaiging down the street. And so just a little word about the two songs so far. I call them songs as they are now. Obviously they were written as poems. The reason I didn't put traditional airs to them is because, and I might easily have reached for some well-known lovely traditional airs, and like Shannon's airs that would support the lovely stories and the expression in these songs. But I couldn't because she made it a little bit awkward in terms of the shape of the verses. So If I could just click back to the harbour, for example, it runs 3 lines that are the same length, and then what's kind of a tail, a little short line. So that's why I ended up composing a new air for it. So when you listen to the air, it's like la deedle diddle deedle diddle do, line 1. Da deedle diddle deedle diddle do, line 2. And then we'll go back to line 1 again in terms of the air, almost. La deedle diddle deedle diddle. And then this is where the tail comes in. Da deedle diddle do, to finish it off. So it's kind of A, B, A, and a tail in terms of the form of it. So just to show you, I fell into composing the tunes really. I hadn't set myself out to compose as such. And in terms of in service, there's actually 3 lines. So, you know, in traditional song, you'll generally have 4 lines or you'll have 8 lines. And if you have a poem that's 4 lines, you can take an 8-line air and add that to it, of course, as well. But I had none of those options available to me. And isn't it great and everything, because I found that, that I could still put some airs to these songs to give expression to them. So, yeah, in service is basically 3 long lines, and it has a slightly similar approach to it. So at that, I'll ask Bairbre up again to tell us a little bit more about Winifred's work. We're kind of going chronologically through Winifred's life. So thank you, Bairbre.
Thanks, Aileen. Through Winifred's writings and through her membership of the United Arts Club in Dublin, she was very familiar with all the members of the literary revival. So she was a friend of W.B. Yeats, Lady Gregory. In fact, she was only the 2nd woman to have a play performed in the Abbey. Lady Gregory was the first. And Winifred is one of the few women to date to have had more than one play in the Abbey. She was a friend of Frank and William Fay, the great Abbey actors. She used to go to the salon that A.E. George Russell held. Tomás MacDonagh and his wife Muriel came to tea in her house, in her home in Blackrock with her mother. She went to their flat in Baggot Street. She met Grace Gifford there. And this was going on in the early 1910s. And Maeve Binchy interviewed her in 1969 for the Irish Times, and she asked her what sort of a life she had and what did she do all day. And Winifred said, I did nothing. I did the flowers, I cared for my mother, I cycled around Wicklow, and obviously she looked after Tim, the Irish Terrier, her Irish Terrier that we saw in the previous slide there. She was very fond of Tim and wrote many a poem about him. But when war broke out, her literary nationalist circle remained on one side, and Winifred really reverted to her unionist and family background. And she signed up with the local voluntary aid detachment in Blackrock, which was a body of volunteers who were ready to be called on as needed in time of war. She trained in Baggot Street for 1 month, and then she was sent to the 2nd Western General Hospital in Manchester, and she worked as what they called a nursing VAD, or really a nurse's aide. And she wrote her 2nd book, her 2nd collection of poetry came from that period, called Halloween and Poems of the War. Interestingly, her publication, her collection of poetry predates Frances Ledwidge's collection, Siegfried Sassoon and Wilfred Owen. But she was sidelined because the view was that the male perspective, that the man on the battlefield understood war, and that the woman who was working in the hospital ward, working with people who had come back shell-shocked, who had lost limbs, who were blinded, who had lost their mental capacities, that they didn't understand war. So Winifred's, even though her poetry was very, very popular in the late 1910s and 1920s, she then disappeared out of view even as a war poet. And when she came back from Manchester after her 1 year, she went to Baggot Street Hospital again, and she trained as a masseuse, which was the earliest form of physiotherapy. And she became a registered member of the Institute, ISTM, the Incorporated Society of Trained Masseuses. And she worked in command depots and military hospitals in Manchester, in Northumberland, and then in Blackrock in the military orthopaedic hospital there. and her war poetry, if you get a chance to see it, and her books of war poetry are available in the libraries and online, and it is extremely moving. And Aileen now will give us a sample of some of her war poetry.
There's a woman sobs her heart out with her head against the door, for the man that's called to leave her, God have pity on the poor. And its beat, drums beat, as the lads march down the street, and its blow, trumpets blow, keep your tears until they go. There's a crowd of little children who march along and shout, for it's fine to play at soldiers now their fathers are called out. And it's beat, drums beat, but who'll find them food to eat? And it's blow, trumpets blow, oh, it's the little children know. There's a mother who stands watching for the last look of her son, a worn poor widow woman, and he her only one. And it's beat, drums beat, but God knows when we shall meet, and it's blow, trumpets blow. We must smile and cheer them so. There's a girl who stands there laughing, 'cause she thinks a war is grand, 'cause it's fine to see the lads pass, and it's fine to hear the band. But it's beat, drums beat, as the lads march down the street, and it's blow, trumpets blow, God go with you where you go. And it's beat, drums beat, to the fall of many feet, and it's blow, trumpets blow, God go with you where you go.
I think that stands out for its representations of women and children, and is very effective, the contrasting scenes and emotions. Another from that period then, Halloween. As Barbara said, when war broke out, Winifred felt to her early years and her unionist background in terms of when the war and the rising took place, whereas she had hung out with the likes of Markovich, she was on a different side now. But in terms of Winifred's culture, she really absorbed Irish folk culture and belief so much. And for an anti-war song from that time, she really nicely has background to this song, the belief that at Halloween and at All Souls that the dead come back. And so,
why do you wait at your door, woman, alone in the night? I am waiting for one who will come, stranger, to show him a light. He will see me all alone on the road.
has he companions to cheer him? Aye, Manny, she said, the candles are lighted, and the hearthstones are swept, the fires glow red. We shall welcome them out of the night, our homecoming dead.
Thanks, Aileen. So after the war, Winifred continued to work as a masseuse in various hospitals, and she worried about income. She didn't seem to be getting much money in from either her work or her poetry. And suddenly, in what she called a sudden marriage, at the age of 44, she married William Henry Foster Cheoil. Now, that name might be familiar to some of you. William Henry Foster Cheoil was a widower. His two younger sons had been killed in the First World War, one in 1915 and one in 1917. His daughter was Kathleen Cheoil, the artist and sculptor. His wife died supposedly of a broken heart, and his only surviving son was Reverend George J.F. Cheoil, who was rector of Kiltennel and Ardmine, so that name may be familiar to many of you. And William was 23 years older than Winifred. George and Kathleen were 10 and 7 years younger than her, but the four of them got on fantastically, and George and his wife and his son Peter, and Kathleen and her husband, so they became a very happy family unit. And Winifred moved from Blackrock, which was a rural village in those days, into 19 Fitzwilliam Square, which was the Cheoil townhouse. And she found that move very difficult because she had to wear a hat if she was out in the garden, and she couldn't keep her front door open the way she had in Blackrock, and she had to keep the blinds pulled because that was good manners. So it took a lot of adjustment for her to move into Fitzwilliam Square. But she did love it, and she loved her husband, and they had a great life together, I have to say. And he was, as I mentioned at the beginning of my talk, he was the land agent for the Cheoil estates, which extended from Dublin, Kildare, Sligo, Donegal, and they had a country house, I suppose, in Kilberry, County Kildare, and she spent lots of weekends there. And her book of memoir, Knockmaroon, talks a lot about that life in Kilberry. But they went on honeymoon to Kerry. They had a 23-day honeymoon, travelling around, staying in Park Nasilla and Sneem and all sorts of lovely hotels and places there. Winifred learned to drive on that trip. She drove to Malls Gap. And one of the letters that she wrote on her honeymoon to her great friend William Monk Gibbon, who was also a poet and a neighbour of hers in Dublin, she had this to say to him: "It's like Christmas, this getting married suddenly. My husband is buying Kerry cattle. He is more like someone in an abbey play than I ever guessed. To hear him and see him among Kerry cattle dealers is a revelation. I didn't ever really know him until I saw him at a cattle fair, but to every man his art."
So he was a different man when he was dealing with the lads at the fair. I love that. And I love that it brings us to this song, which is very different to what I've just sung as well in terms of the tone. And I mean, I think Winifred must have been great fun. We can see that she was from some of her work. And let me see. So yeah, this time there's 4 lines, nice equal length lines. So this time the air I put to it is one you probably know. So the song is called the Kerry Cow. It's in Connacht or in Munster that yourself... Oh, I'm going to have to bring it down a little bit because there's a high part in this. It's in Connacht or in Munster that yourself might travel wide and be asking all the herds you'd meet along the countryside, but you'd never meet a one could show the likes of her till now, where she's grazing in a Leinster field, my little Kerry cow. If herself went to the cattle fairs, she'd put all the cows to shame, for the finest poets of the land would meet to sing her fame, and the young girls would be asking leave to stroke her satin coat. They'd be praising and caressing her and calling her a dote. If the King of Spain gets news of her, he'll fill his purse with gold and set sail to ask the English king where she is to be sold. But the King of Spain may come to me, a crown upon his brow. It is he may keep his golden purse, and I my Kerry cow. The priest maybe will tell her fame to the holy Pope of Rome, and the Cardinal's College send for her to leave her Irish home. But it's Heartbrook she would be itself to cross the Irish Sea. 'Twould be best they'd send a blessing to my Kerry cow and me. When the Ulster men hear tell of her, they'll come with swords and pikes, for in civil war there being no less if they should see her lights. And you read it on the paper of the bloody fight there's been, and the orange men they're burying in fields of Leinster green. There are red cows, that's contrary, and there's white cows square and wild, but my Kerry cow is biddable and gentle as a child. You may rear up kings and heroes on the lovely milk she yields, for she's fit to foster generals to fight our battlefields. In the histories they'll be making, they've a right to put her name with the horse of Troy and Oisin's hounds and other beasts of fame. And the painters will be painting her beneath the hawthorn bough, where she's grazing on the good green grass, my little Kerry cow.
So in the years following Winifred's marriage to William Henry Foster Cheoil, she changed her focus somewhat in terms of her writings. She wrote less long poetry and she wrote more prose. She wrote children's books, young adults' books, her book of memoir, and she wrote a book about St. Patrick's travels around Ireland. She was asked to write that to tie in with the Eucharistic Congress of 1932. She was probably the only Protestant person who was asked to write a book for the Eucharistic Congress. The poetry she wrote in that period was much shorter, and a lot of it was published in Country Life and in The Field. So there were maybe 6-8 line pieces about nature, and beautiful pieces. She was also published with her prose, particularly in the Times, the Irish Times, the Irish Independent, the Irish Statesman, the Spectator, various American and Canadian journals, British papers and so on. And she also wrote for Irish Travel, which was the newsletter or magazine of the Tourism Association. And she drove herself all around Ireland, looking particularly at archaeological and historic sites, and wrote them up and took the photographs and all that were used in the Irish Tourism Association's newsletter. She had a play in the Gate Theatre in 1941, produced by Lord and Lady Longford's company, and she had lots of short stories and short plays broadcast on Radio Éireann and on BBC. And her book Pomona, a book about Pomona, she had 2 books on Pomona, were voted the second most popular children's books on BBC Children's Hour. But one of the other very famous appearances of Winifred's poetry was with the Cuala Press, which you may know was the hand-printing press run by Elizabeth Yeats, the sister of W.B. Yeats and Jack B. Yeats, and it was run by an all-female company in Churchtown in County Dublin. And this beautiful poem about St. Bridget is illustrated, as you can see, by Kathleen Verscoil, by her stepdaughter. And as far as I know, it's the only drawing that Kathleen did for the Cuala Press. But Winifred had 5 or 6, 7 maybe pieces used by the Cuala Press on prints and on greeting cards. And there was also another company like the Cuala Press called Cluna Studio, and a lady from Wexford, from Faith House in County Wexford, Daisy O'Keefe, or Margaret O'Keefe, she was the artist for the Cluna Studio, and she did another poem about St. Bridget and a poem about St. Stephen's Green, which Winifred Letts did as well. I was very lucky in that when I was born, Winifred gave me a present of this St. Bridget image from the Cuala Press. So that is one of my many gifts that Winifred gave to me. And I'm going to hand over to Aileen again now.
So in looking at more of Winifred's work with a view to putting an air to it, to make a song, I had looked at this, glanced at it, with that, wearing that hat, and went, well, that's not going to work. There's only 6 lines to it. But I still didn't let that stop me. So a couple of little devices, and I've turned this into a little song. The dandelion lights its spark, lest Bridget find the wayside dark. Fall-a-deedle-diddle-deedle-do, fall-a-deedle-diddle-do. And brother wind comes rollicking for joy that she has brought the spring. Fall-a-deedle-diddle-deedle-do, fall-a-deedle-diddle-do. Young lambs and little furry folk seek shelter underneath her cloak. Fall-a-deedle-diddle-deedle-do, fall-a-deedle-diddle-do. The dandelion lights its spark, lest Bridget find the wayside dark. Fall-a-deedle-diddle-deedle-do, fall-a-deedle-diddle-do. I do a lot of singing in schools, and most of my go-to songs in the first place, when I'm meeting them for the first time, are songs that have lilted choruses, so like ring dum da ring a dum da, and they just absolutely love it. And it's just because of that experience, I suppose, I thought, well, these little couplets are so beautiful, and they actually work really well, nicely spaced out, so you have time to reflect on the beautiful imagery, again, that she's packed into these 6 lines. And then another device that we know well with traditional song is if you get to the end of the song, if there's a chorus, sing it again. If there's a line you can repeat the line, or sometimes you go back and you sing the first verse again. So I pulled the first little 2 lines down again. So that's how I got a song out of that one. So I'll have you up again, Bairbre. Thank you very much.
As Aileen mentioned, Winifred had a great sense of humour. She was also a very kind and generous person, and she loved children, all children. So whether it was her nieces and nephew, her 8 godchildren, her grandnieces, including this lady in red here in the image on the left, or on your right there, the children that she looked after, poor children from town whom she looked after, did massage on them when they were injured. The children who lived in the lane behind Fitzwilliam Square. Again, a family of poor children called Lynch, whom she brought to the sea at Merrion Strand. She brought them in their new car up the Dublin mountains, and she brought them to stay with my mother's family in Kildare on part of the Fresh Air Fund, so to get city children out into the fresh air and show them, what life was like in a rural setting. And her second book of second children's book was called Naughty Sophia, and in the foreword she talks to the children to whom she dedicated it, who were 2 neighbours of hers in Blackrock. And she said, "Someone asked me once if I found it hard to write near a window overlooking a garden where children were laughing and talking. The answer to that is that it would be hard to write if children were not laughing and talking outside the window." And that, I suppose, sums up Winifred's attitude to children. She was involved with them in every way. She used to play hunt. This lady Oriana remembers playing Hunt the Silver Thimble with her in the drawing room. She loved having Halloween parties, Easter egg hunts. She used to bring the children in to tea parties, and the special treat was to have tea parties in the kitchen, not in the drawing room. She spent a lot of time obviously in Ardmine with her stepson Reverend George Verscoil, and she was very fond of Peter, his son, and would bring him to Dublin to stay with them in Fitzwilliam Square. She even took the children ice skating on the canal when it was iced over in 1937, there was a huge ice, and she went as well. She used to go down, she was a friend of Sarah Purser who lived in Mespel House, and very close to the canal. They used to go down there and ice skate on the canal. And that was all at the same time as doing lots of other roles. So she was a founding member of the Women Writers Club. She was working with the DSPCA and lots of other charities. When the DSPCA had financial difficulties, she donated her royalties to them. She was a committee member of the Irish Pen Centre. She looked after William, who was that much older than her and wasn't very well for the final years of her life. She was a very, very active member of the Wildflower Society, and up into her 80s was travelling all over Britain and Ireland recording samples of different wildflowers. She was an avid theatre goer, and she writes in her diaries about bringing the girls who worked for her to the pantomime. Even the first day that they started working in the house as servant girls, kitchen girls, she'd bring them to the pantomime and to the theatre. And she welcomed everybody into Fitzwilliam Square. So she was a lovely friend to have, and I am so glad that South Dublin Libraries and Emma there gave me the opportunity to put her life down in writing, because as Aileen had mentioned earlier, there was some material about her on the internet, but a lot of it was incorrect. So my goal was to write it down correctly once and for all, and then other people can decide from there what they want to study, what they want to read. But she has such a wide variety of written material, and I would love to think that you would all go to your libraries on your return to your homes and ask them to find you one of the Winifred Letts books of poetries or children's stories, or her book of memoir, Not Maroon. So thank you again very much for the opportunity to be here, and Aileen will close the session, I think.
So this is a song called To a May Baby that she wrote for her godson,
To come a tulip time, how wise, perhaps you will not now regret, on the shining garden's jewel set of your first home in paradise, nor fret, because you might not quite forget. To come at swallow time, how wise, when every bird has built a nest. Now you may fold your wings and rest, and watch this new world with surprise, a guest for whom the earth has done her best. To come when life is gay, how wise, with lambs and every happy thing that frisks on foot or sports on wing, with daisies and with butterflies full of spring, and naught so sweet as you do bring.
Yeah, if you can bear with us for another few minutes. We've been doing really well on time, considering we could probably both spend the whole day chatting and talking about Winifred and her work. So, if I may share with you something that to me is incredibly important. My treatment of Winifred's words, how, as an artist living now with no contact with Winifred, how can I know that she might be happy with how I feel I've kind of collaborated with somebody? I've collaborated with somebody who died 3 years before I was born. So she died, passed away at age 90 in 1972, and I was born in 75. I feel a little bit like I'm living around 100 years ago, in fact. The last time I stood here in December, I was sharing some new songs that I had written as part of a Wexford County Council centenary bursary, and is it any wonder that the stories that come up here and that came up in my reflections are reflections on men. Sorry, I meant to say women. Funny how men come out. So many of the stories of the new songs I wrote, and the reflections here, especially when you look at the war songs, they're the perspectives and reflections on the experiences of women and children, which have often, maybe not have been somewhat neglected. So I just thought that was worth saying. Yeah, but look at what would Winifred think? I'm going to share with you, if I may, an absolutely fantastic note I got from Oriana. So in the picture here, you have the three of us, and you have Oriana, who is the great-grand-niece, I'm right, of Winifred M. that you referred to, Barbara, as playing the hunted thimble and stuff, another one of the children that Winifred was so fond of. And Oriana heard me sing a couple of the songs that I've shared with you here at the book launch that was had back in last October. So if I could indulge in sharing what is a huge compliment, I hope that's okay, because I just think it's so important in terms of artistic interpretation and trying to be true to the original writer and all that. So I want to share with you. Oriana said, "I want to say how beautifully you set Wynn's poetry to music. Your settings are right in every way. I was not sure what it would sound like, but the words and music fitted like a comfortable glove. Your voice and empathy for all the words was a delight and joy, which was felt by all. It was truly fitting to her words and sentiments. Thank you so much for bringing her poetry to life in this touching but strong way. I feel sure Winifred would have been surprised but gratified by the whole event. Can you imagine how surprised and gratified she would be by this event? So thank you all so much for coming and sharing. And before we go, I just want to round up with a couple of thank yous. And we actually have a copy of the book, which are for sale here now after the event. Could we do a little presentation to Aileen? Aileen, would you come up here? And Emma Edwards from South Dublin County Council, and Bairbre O'Hogan, biographer. We'd just like to present a copy to the library, and thank you all so much for hosting us here today. I'd like to thank Nora Byrne-Kavanagh for, she organised all the events, along with others of course, that are happening in the library. You've seen the programme, I'm sure, and also all the library staff. So I had a list of them here because they're right down. Let's see, Grania and Yvonne and Susan and Aileen and Dervla and Lenny. I hope I have everybody there. And so we get in for a photo, will we? You want to get in there?
Yeah, absolutely.
Here,
So,
Oh no, I did
no.
She's not going in. No, I'm not actually.
You're used to your role, is it?
Lovely stuff. Brilliant.
Thank you
Thank you.
very much indeed for having us here. Sorry, hold on a minute.
I'm not tied up enough yet for that kind of stuff. So.
and if anyone has any questions, why not hang around a little after while you're purchasing a copy of the book? Susan over there. Or, I don't know.
No,
will we do two lots?
Yeah,
do you want to do one?
sorry, I'll take another one down here.
I've just got it. Do you want to take another one, Grant?
Sorry, yeah, sorry. No.
Okay.
Yes, we for the social media site was on. Lovely, brilliant.
Thank you, Grant.
And thank you very much indeed, Ryan, for having us.
And the way to explain the difficulties.
Yeah. Well, will I?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Okay, I'll just
I feel a lovely book.